This conference will now be recorded.
Yes, start, Lakshmikant.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, as in continuation with our big critical care discussions, we'll be continuing with today's session. There's a small change with the schedule today, which the topic has been already been informed to you all. That is ventilating patients with traumatic brain injury and neurosurgery patients. So today we have Dr. Raghunath, renowned critical care specialist. He's a consultant consultant in critical care medicine, Gopalgowda Hospital, chairman of ICSM chapter Mysore, and is a director of Impact. So on behalf of Impact, ISCCM Mysore chapter and Mahan, I welcome Dr. Raghunath. Dr. Raghunath, please enlighten all of us about ventilating patients with traumatic brain injury and post-operative neurosurgery patients. Last 3-4 classes have been on like stroke, traumatic brain injury, surgical intervention, how to do, when to do. So now we'll concentrate more on the setting the ventilator, how to ventilate them, what should be the strategy to ventilate them, what are targets in ventilating such patients. Dr. Raghunath.
Lakshmikant, can you see my screen?
Yeah. No. I can see your laptop screen. PPT is to be shared actually. Screen share ಆಗಬೇಕು.
One second.
Yeah. Screen share ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ.
Yeah, I will do now.
Okay. Yes.
I think.
Yeah, it's visible.
Now you can see?
Yeah.
Visible, okay? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Lakshmikant. Today I'm going to discuss on ventilating patients with traumatic brain injury, as well as also in neurosurgery, how to manage patient on ventilator with respect to the TBI as well as neurosurgical patient. So a goal of this talk will be to discuss on mainly on the oxygenation part, ventilation part, especially with the carbon dioxide, and as well as with respect to PEEP, how it affects the ICP. And also we'll try to touch on weaning of these patients, which will be most of the time difficult one. I'm not going to discuss on mechanic ventilation, just we'll discuss oxygenation, ventilation, PEEP, and weaning with respect to traumatic brain injury as well as neurosurgical patients. To understand this mechanic ventilation, again, we should have this basic this knowledge of intracranial contents, especially the brain consists of 88% of the volume, CSF around 8%, and blood around 2 to 3%. Meninges very negligible. So this is under normal condition, the intracranial pressure remains constant around 10 to 15. Fluctuate with the cardiac and respiratory cycle, but most of the time it will be around 10 to 15. Since the cranium is rigid container, the sum of the various intracranial volumes like brain tissue, CSF, and blood must remain constant. Cerebral fluid, spinal fluid is continuously formed and reabsorbed. If you see this picture, the first one, the intracranial pressure under normal condition is a sidestep section. Here, some of these components, CSF and cerebral tissue and blood, is maintaining around ICP around 10 to 15. Here continuously the CSF is formed and absorbed here. If you look here, if there is a mass lesion like a SDH, hematoma, is causing compression on the brain parenchyma, okay, it increasing ICP here, SDH. It may be also this ICP may increase because edema or vasodilatation, so many reasons actually. So if you look at monitor the ICP look like a this line. Actually this is a normal intrathoracic pressure tracing. You can see this ICP maintaining around 10 to 12 here. When there is a mass lesion, is there intracranial pressure increases, there's a significantly rise in ICP here. It is going beyond 20, then we are worried. If it is goes beyond 10 or beyond 20 and we are not treating it, if it is sustained, then the patient may have herniation. It may be a midline shift, first one, or it may be ankle herniation from paramedian line, or maybe a central herniation. This patient will deteriorate in front of us and may even die because of this brain lesion. So Monro-Kelly hypothesis is very clear. If a new volume is added in order to maintain normal ICP, a mandatory reciprocal reduction volume of the other will be occurs. So this, as a treatment point of view, the patient is increasing ICP. What most of the time, if the patient traumatic brain injury is coming to the ICU, yes, obviously if the patient GC is less, you are intubated ventilator, then and most important parameter, if there is a mass lesion is there, which is to be removed as early as possible, that is the otherwise ICP will not reduce. Then we have option of reducing brain size with the mannitol or hypertonic substance. If there is a EVD is there, you can even drain CSF. And surgical removal, as we explained, reduction of blood by inducing hyperventilation to induce vasoconstriction is one of the modality to reduce the cerebral blood volume that we are going to discuss with the mechanical ventilation. There is others hypothesis, Rosner's hypothesis. This is what he tells: if there is a secondary brain lesions secondary to cerebral ischemia as a consequence of systemic or cerebral factors. Because of the systemic factor like hypoxemia, we can cause cerebral ischemia, that can cause secondary brain problems, hypotension, hyperthermia, hyperglycemia, even hypothermia. These are the systemic factors, even though factors also affect the causes secondary injuries to the brain. There are cerebral factors also like elevated ICP, lowered CPP, cerebral perfusion pressure, edema, space occupying lesions, seizures. These all causes secondary brain problems because of the secondary problems. With respect to the even though it is a basically discussion of mechanical ventilation, again we go with the airway breathing circulation. That is the priority in all. This may be a neurosurgery or it may be a traumatic brain injury. Once we maintain airway breathing circulation, most important is we have to prevent hypoxemia, prevent hypotension, most important thing, prevent hypo or hypercarbia, prevent hyperthermia, prevent hyperglycemia, and prevent pain. I just added pain, even restlessness also we have to prevent in the management when the patient is on mechanical ventilator. We'll just discuss hypoxia, hypotension, how it affects badly with the traumatic brain injuries. If you look here, if there is no hypoxemia or hypotension, the death is less. Okay, outcome is very good. If there is only hypoxemia is there, death rate is increasing, outcome is reducing. If there is hypotension is there, death rate is increasing, outcome is reducing. If both are there, dead patients are more. Hypoxemia in a significant proportion, patient with traumatic brain injury is 22%. Mortality with respect to non-hypoxic and hypoxic, we see it is a 14.3% in non-hypoxic and 50% hypoxic patients. So the point here is, even though there is a primary injury to the brain, the most important factor which kills immediately is the hypoxemia. That is, we have to take immediately, especially emergency. If the patient is having, tongue fall and airway obstruction, that can kill the patient immediately. So taking care of those factors are more important. If you look into the hypotension, even single episode of hypotension, it may be a pre or in-hospital hypotension, which is associated with the high mortality, including even hypoxemia also. Single episode of hypoxemia increase the mortality significantly in these patients. Repeated episode associated with higher mortality. So it's not the one episode we have managed. If okay, let's the number of episodes of hypotension increases, there is an increase in mortality. So that is the importance of hypoxia, hypotension in these patients. So BP management, as already discussed, but I want to put here British Brain Trauma Foundation 2016. There is insufficient with respect to level 1, level 2 guidelines. But if you look at the level 3 guidelines, with the not very good randomized control studies that mentions slightly higher BP. Earlier we are thinking of BP of 90. Now they are mentioning systolic BP of more than 100 for patient with 50 to 69 years. At more than 110, maybe we consider for the 15 to 49 years. In the younger people, we can consider even 110 BP, and even older people, more than 70 years, we can consider 110 BP. That is the importance of BP threshold in this patient. Coming to the avoiding, how to avoid hypoxemia, rapid control of airway is the primary thing here to avoid hypoxemia or hypercapnia. If the patient is GCS low, yes, definitely will go into intubate. Even the patient is restless, irritable, those patients may also require intubation ventilation, so to reduce the ICP here. So rise in ICP should be, it will be minimized. You have to go for rapid sequence induction. We can use induction agent which you are very familiar. You can use etomidate, propofol. Even if the patient is in shock state, you can use ketamine. Earlier, ketamine was not used in the patient, ICP patient, but if the patient is having hypotension, maintenance of BP management will be a priority compared to the worrying about ICP there. Muscle relaxant, we can use succinylcholine or acurinium, no harm. Rapid sequence induction is the priority here because most of the patient will be having full stomach. There is a risk of aspiration is very high in these patients. So modified rapid sequence induction in trauma is the key here. Manual inline axial stabilization without any traction. We have to adopt this technique in day-to-day practice. Yeah, all of us actually sometimes we'll forget to do this in our daily practice. Releasing anterior cervical collar, allow mouth opening, permitting cricoid pressure. Yeah, there is a controversy in cricoid pressure, but it will helpful intubation if when we are managed with the manual inline stabilization. And ambu bag if there is hypoxemia and hypercapnia. Indication for intubation, any patient TBI requires definitive airway protection because there is a severe traumatic brain injury. I'm talking, there is a risk of pulmonary aspiration and compromised respiratory drive and function. Most common indication will be distress, respiratory distress, hypoxemia, hypercapnia, airway compromise like GCS less than 8, seizures, airway bleed. Most of the time, if the facial trauma is there, if the bleed is there, that is the we have to intubate early. Otherwise, the patient may go for difficult airway in this patient. Sedation may compromise, then we required airway compromise there. Clinical high ICP herniation in front of you, have to intubate this patient. Significant associated, if the other injuries also there, then also we have to consider this. So I already hypoxemia I told, hypotension, importance of hypotension also we have told, but how to treat hypotension? Once you intubate, most of the time because of the vasodilatory effects of the drugs, or maybe because of the positive pressure of the mechanic ventilation, there is a patient may drop BP. A single drop in BP increase the mortality in this patient. That is the most important thing. Once you intubate, make sure BP is maintaining adequately with fluid restrictions. Try to avoid, definitely not try, avoid hypotonic saline. You can use normal saline, but definitely avoid dextrose containing solutions here. If there is a bleeding is there, in spite of fluid, if the bleeding is there, make sure that there is somewhere patient is bleeding. It may be back, or it may be limbs, or it may be abdomen, if it may be thorax. Try to stop the bleeding. They have to go for ATLS mantra. Again, do a survey, primary, secondary, tertiary, every survey to be done repeatedly. Make sure that if the patient is having drop in BP, how to identify that factor and treat it. So once you intubate and taken care of hypoxemia, immediate hypoxemia and hypotension, position the patient. Just a very simple technique will reduce the ICP significantly. Elevating the head end up 30 degrees facilitates cerebral venous drainage, decrease the ICP, and immediately we can do this. And neck in neutral position. The more neck is, if it is in the lateral position, or very much flexed position, what will happen? There is no cerebral venous drainage. It decreases the cerebral blood volume, indirectly increases the ICP. So positioning of the patient on ventilator is also very important in this patient. Make sure that you have given adequate sedation, because if the patient is not calm, restless, irritable, again that increases the ICP. Main key here, maintaining ICP with when you intubate, ventilate these patients. Keeping pain free, adequate analgesic, and use fentanyl. Make sure if there is any pain is there, try to address that part as early as possible. While using sedation, again make sure that hemodynamic stability should be maintained. Bladder catheterization, most of bladder will be full, this patient, that is causing more anxiety or pain. do bladder catheterization, abdominal distension with NG tube, a simple technique, definitely reduce the abdominal pressure. It will be helpful in the ventilation. This way simple technique, it also indirectly reduce the ICP, because even abdominal pressure, intrathoracic pressure will be transmitted to the brain, causing increase in ICP. So these are the important features. This is a key feature here, regulating PaCO2. We all know PaCO2 make a major role in case with respect to cerebral blood flow. So PaCO2, partial pressure of arterial carbon dioxide, is equal to carbon dioxide consumption divided by alveolar ventilation. Consumptions will be if you keep it as a stable patient, carbon dioxide being stable, production is stable. I'm sorry, the carbon dioxide production stable, and its PaCO2 is inversely related to alveolar ventilation. Alveolar ventilation is nothing but tidal volume into respiratory rate. So by adjusting tidal volume and respiratory rate, we can adjust this PaCO2, and indirectly we can adjust the cerebral blood flow. How we'll discuss now. If you see this curve, there is changes in the cerebral blood flow related to PaCO2 level variation. In the case of respiratory acidosis, if the PaCO2 is increasing 40 to 50, 50 to 60, 60 to 70, we can see there is a significant increase in the cerebral vasculature, can augment cerebral blood flow here. Blood flow is increasing significantly here. If you are reducing 40 to 20, we can see here, if cerebral blood flow will be reduced by vasoconstriction after a drop of PaCO2. When a PaCO2 value is fall from 40 to 20, there is a drop of cerebral blood flow almost 50%. So cerebral blood flow will be reduced by 50% if the PaCO2 reduced by 40 to 20. So hyperventilation is used as one of the method for rapidly lowering ICP earlier. And why? Because it is a very potent intervention. We can say we can reduce the cerebral blood flow. There is approximately 2% decrease in cerebral blood flow for every 1 millimeter increase decrease in PaCO2. So that is the importance of PaCO2. Actually, hyperventilation causes decreased PaCO2, which subsequently causes arterial vasoconstriction, thus lowers the cerebral blood flow. This is the mechanism, and then it reduces the cerebral blood volume and ICP. How it affects? This effect is mediated by pH changes. When there is a PaCO2 drops, there is a pH increases. That causes extra in pH change in extracellular fluid, which cause cerebral vasoconstriction, or in opposite direction can vasodilation depending on the pH. This, if you see the curve, this is the perfusion pressure here. Perfusion pressure is maintained around 50 to almost 150. Is maintained constant if the autoregulation is maintained normal. If you look at the PaCO2, it is almost in relation with the linear, but PaO2 is not like that. PaO2 is maintaining almost with the PP, but PaCO2 is linear. Under normal condition, PaCO2 is the most powerful determinant of cerebral blood flow. Even though in normal condition it affects between the range of 20 to 80 mmHg, CBF is linearly responsive to PaCO2. Low PaCO2 therefore result in low cerebral blood flow and may result in cerebral ischemia, while high PaCO2 levels can result in cerebral hyperemia and cause increase in ICP. And also, this hyperventilation by causing reduction in PaCO2 is not happening at the global, I want to say, as a overall in cerebral blood flow, but also regional blood flow changes also will be there. Neurological injury can create a significant regional heterogeneity of carbon dioxide responsiveness. Areas of significant hypoperfusion may develop with hyperventilation. Normal is, I told, 2 to 3% changes for every millimeter carbon dioxide, but in abnormal, even it may be up to 1% to 9%. That is a significant fluctuation in regional blood flow. So brain injury can impair pressure autoregulation, that again impact the effect of hyperventilation. Basically, what I'm telling is this, earlier recommendation was, hyperventilation can be used within 24 hours and all, but cerebral blood flow is decreased already within 24 hours. Already it has decreased, most of them it decreased to less than half. So cerebral metabolism is also decreased. If you use hyperventilation in these patients, it will definitely adversely affect the parameters. So hyperventilation is not at all good. If by reduction in PaCO2 causes more and more reduction in carbon dioxide, carbon causes increase in vasoconstriction, reduce in cerebral blood flow, causes ischemic brain problem. So there is a cerebral ischemia is more common with the PCO2. Where is the evidence? According to British Trauma Foundation, they have taken a class 2 study. There is no class 1 study here, but class 2 study. But in that study, the one that is a world study that is a randomized control trial. They used around 113 patient. When they use hyperventilation with control patient, they found that the patient who are hyperventilated, GCS score of 4 to 5 are not with PSCO2 of less than 25 during first 5 days have a very bad outcome. So this is around 3 months and 6 months outcome benefit. 12 months there was not significant statistically, but hyperventilation cause more harm than benefit. Better try to avoid in the traumatic brain injury patients. Recommendation, this is a recent evidence. There is insufficient evidence, British Trauma Foundation, to support level 1 or level 2A, but level 2B, prolonged prophylactic hyperventilation with partial pressure of carbon dioxide in arterial blood of 25 less is not recommended. Very clear it is, so you should avoid that part. Coming to the oxygenation with the PEEP, when the patient is having aspiration or already in the patient going for pneumonia, going for ERDS, then you have to use PEEP. Or patient inspired effort to 60% is there, then we try to increase the PEEP. But once you increase the PEEP, that can increase the intrathoracic pressure, that affect the increase in intracranial pressure. What is the relation between PEEP and ICP? Increase in intrathoracic pressure leading to decrease in cerebral venous drainage and consequently increase in cerebral blood volume and ICP. So what will happen? It actually increasing ICP. This PEEP transmission is happening via jugular vein to increase venous pressure and ICP, and also transmission via epidural or vertebral venous flexure. This is a transmission. Ultimately, actually, it is a two mechanism. Is by reducing venous drainage, increases the cerebral volume and increase the ICP, or transmission. So effect of PEEP when there is ICP is high. If the normal is there, ICP is normal, definitely PEEP is transmitted. When the ICP is already high, there is a controversy. High ICP means already collapsed veins is there. How PEEP will affect these increase in ICP? That is one thought process actually here. And if the patient is having pulmonary compliance, good or bad, that also affect the relation of PEEP and ICP. The increase in central venous pressure and reduction in mean arterial pressure, and also cerebral perfusion pressure after PEEP have been found in patient with the normal pulmonary compliance. Means if there is a lung compliance is normal, what will happen? The more PEEP transmitted to the intrathoracic pressure, the central venous pressure will be reduced. That affects the CPP. If the pulmonary compliance is not good, is low, then what will happen? If you use PEEP up to 12 has no significant effect on cerebral systemic hemodynamics. These all smaller studies have shown that if the patient is already having a bad lung, may not be transmit the PEEP to the cerebral systemic hemodynamics. This is again one study, it's an animal study. When they used up to 15, there is no increase in ICP, no much difference, causing high PEEP, causing high ICP in these patients. So PEEP now up to 12, maybe up to 15 can be used without affecting much ICP. If PEEP is causing problem like hypotension, then we are not done good volume. Actually, we have to give more fluid in those patients. If the PEEP is causing reduction in BP, if the PEEP is causing compromise in the hemodynamics, then we have to use more fluid to bring the BP up rather than reducing PEEP. So PEEP affecting ICP is minimally up to 12 or 15. Elevate the head and dead, again reduce the PEEP effect actually. Euvolemia to minimize the cardiovascular effect. Balance PEEP again is need to maintain. We should not use high PEEP, definitely. Balance PEEP with respect to oxygenation to maintain oxygenation. So airway care and ICP. Whenever we try to use suctioning and all, there is an increase in ICP because patient will cough, and maybe struggling on ventilator. In a pre-oxygen patient, TBI, there will be a prior to the and after suctioning. There is transient increase in ICP, transient increase in MAP, and preserved CPP does not affect the much of cerebral, oxygenation. So there is no harm actually, no need to completely sedate or paralyze this patient just for the suctioning point of view. because the very transient increase in ICP will be there. Coming to the weaning part, when you try to extubate, should extubation be delayed till GCS improves? So in that case, what will happen if you delay because of the GCS patient, more is maybe all taking all slightly older studies with respect to traumatic brain injury I have taken here and neurosurgical patients. When you consider the patient till the patient become alert, then there will be a longer duration of ventilation will be there, risk of pneumonia, ICU stay, problem will be there. So what will happen? Try to go for early tracheostomy, and weaning these patients is a better option. How to wean is a regular technique, spontaneous breathing trial. An initial brief period of spontaneous breathing can be used to assess the patient's ability to do formal spontaneous breathing trial. Can go for up to 30 minutes or 120 minutes. Spontaneous breathing should be sorry for that. Patient who tolerate 30 to 120 minutes SBT should promptly be considered for ventilator discontinuation. Means regular technique spontaneous breathing trial should be used in these patients. But what is problem with weaning in these patients? The weaning problem here is most of the patients they will not go for easy weaning, they will come with the difficult weaning. What is this difficult weaning? Patient who failed for the first SBT and require up to 3 spontaneous breathing trial or up to 7 days. You are trying for spontaneous breathing trial. How you try for spontaneous breathing trial? You are using TPS trial or low pressure support of 6 or 8 and PEEP of 5 you are trying, and try and see whether the patient breathe adequately or not with lower pressure support or TPS trial. If the patient is not able to breathe with the lower pressure support or TPS trial, then it is not easy weaning, it becomes the difficult weaning. If still up to 3 trials also not failed, then called difficult weaning. If the more than 7 days requiring weaning, we call prolonged weaning. These are the neurosurgical patients mostly come with the difficult weaning and prolonged weaning. So there is a risk of mortality also because of weaning per se. So as the GCS increases, this number is not seen here. As the GCS is bad, successful extubation will be very less. So GCS matters a lot in these patients while weaning these patients. So sedation, again, earlier people have to use more and more sedation, more and muscle relaxant to keep them calm and quiet. Not required actually. Once you are okay with the brain part, ICP is not much actually, you are managed without relaxant or sedation, then lesser sedation is the key actually, or stop sedation. Lesser or no sedation is a better option. Intermittent sedation is a better option with this patient, because if you load more and more sedation that accumulate in the patient, that will cause triggering in the ventilator, and also there is a ventilator dyspnea will be there because of sedation per se. As increase in sedation dose, there is an increase in ventilator asynchrony, especially with the trigger factor. Trigger asynchrony is quite common if you use more sedation. Try to use less sedation is the older study I mentioned, but this is a wake-up trial study. But now we have to use lesser sedation or sometimes no sedation if the patient is not recover after 2 to 3 days. Neuromuscular blockade, yes, the more and more neuromuscular blockade you use, there is a risk of more severe disability, more ICU stay, more pneumonia, more risk of infection. Also, risk of critical illness polyneuropathy is very high when you associate with this steroid use. So try to use neuromuscular blockade when it is really required. Maybe first 24 hours, 48 hours maybe because of ICP you can use. Otherwise, stop early neuromuscular blockade. And so this also affect the ventilator asynchrony significantly. So sedation, neuromuscular blockade should be considered very seriously in this patient. Not try to avoid higher dose. Optimizing ventilator settings is the most important thing. Increase work of breathing will be there, maybe because of I mentioned here one of the auto PEEP is there, one of the possibility of the inappropriate settings, ventilator settings, keeping respiratory very high, causing auto PEEP, or reduce compliance and increase your resistive load. This is called flow hunger will be there. If you're not adequately maintaining flow hunger, if you're not maintaining adequately, this is a trigger asynchrony. So look at the ventilator synchronization is the most important factor in this patient. You should never forget about the heart. Should have a low threshold to suspect and treat cardiovascular dysfunction when there is a weaning failure is there, especially volume lower load. Bedside echocardiography most definitely helpful in these patients. Try to use that factor. So physical and occupational therapy and will definitely aid the weaning. There is a multiple studies are coming with the strategy of whole body rehabilitation consisting of interruption of sedation, physical and occupational therapy in earliest days of critical illness was safe and well tolerated. There is no risk of extubation and all. Even the patient is on ventilator, try to mobilize to chair, try to make him stand. That is the most important thing here, so that early aggressive physical and occupational therapy make a lot of difference for the early shifting to ward or discharge. Yes, if the longer duration patient is there, the muscle strength will be affected. Inspiratory muscle strength training improves weaning outcome in failure to wean patients. You can use these technology. Tracheostomy, early tracheostomy in these patients, not all patients. Definitely, if the GCS is low, traumatic brain injury, neurosurgical patient, use those patients. When GCS is low, we can use tracheostomy. There is improved comfort, and also not with respect to VAP, or there is no much difference. The technique definitely help in the management of the patient will be much easier. Thank you. Lakshmikant?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Raghunath.
Yeah.
Quite informative talk. Probably we'll now see if there are any questions from the participants. And meanwhile, they ask questions like, would you like to explain by taking the example of probably a 50 kg adult ideal body weight? How should we what are the initial settings you would recommend? Like?
Ideal body weight, how much? 50 kg.
50 kg, yeah. Tidal volume, rate. What should be the initial settings?
Okay, ideal body weight 60 kg. Then usually what I will do, I will go with the 8 ml per kg tidal volume. Usually we use volume control mode. Mode of the ventilation can use anything. Can use volume control or pressure control, SIME, any mode if you want you can use. But the way of ventilating is the priority here. I will try to use 8 ml per kg of tidal volume. Rate I will keep around 14, 16, and make sure that you know after a few 10 15 minutes we'll take ABG and make sure the PCO2 is maintained around 35 to 40. Then FiO2 I'll start with FiO2 100%. If the saturation is more than 92, I'll try to bring down FiO2 as early as possible as to maintain a target of SpO2 more than 92. Then IE ratio, I'll try to see IE ratio according to the rate, the flow, how much patient required. If the patient flow is requiring flow is more, I keep it 1.1:3 or 1:3.3. Depending upon the patient flow, I'll adjust the IE ratio. And I have told about FiO2, rate, tidal volume, IE ratio, and PEEP. I'll start with the 5 PEEP. Then I'll increase if there is the really need is there. That's it. I use this technique actually. Anything I left?
Yeah, no, that's it. Regarding tidal volume, like lung productive ventilation, is it better or is it okay to continue with 8 feet? I mean, the difference of 6 ml per kg and 8 ml per kg.
Like if there is no patient is not in ARDS, if there is a PO to FiO2 ratio is okay for me, then I will use 8 ml per kg. If the PO to FiO2 is dropping to less than 300, is fitting into the early ARDS, then I'll think of going to 6 ml per kg, because low tidal volume with slightly higher PEEP with the looking at the driving pressure, I would manage this patient. So I'll go with 8. If there is an oxygenation lung issue, then I'll use PEEP.
Okay, like you already mentioned, probably we'll highlight it again. There's a little worry about using the PEEP in patients with head injury with respect to worsening ICP. There are two problems actually. Basically, they are scared of keeping high PEEP. One is that the students or the practitioners feel it might worsen the ICP. The other is higher PEEP might lower the BP. Please explain both the parameters like.
High PEEP with ICP, low PEEP with ICP.
No, high PEEP worsening ICP, and there is some like a myth that higher PEEP will lower the BP, which could again counter. Yeah.
Okay. PEEP is an important intervention, I can say, to recruit the lung if the patient is having hypoxia oxygenation. So most important in ventilating these patients is the oxygenation per se. and hypotension. You try. These are very two important techniques: is avoid hypoxemia, avoid hypotension is the key. As I mentioned, people will become with respect to hypoxemia. If the patient is having low oxygen, low saturation, we'll try to increase the PEEP. So maintaining oxygenation is the priority to avoid the secondary injury to the brain. So I will definitely increase the PEEP to maintain oxygenation, SpO2 more than 92. So the PEEP up to 12 has shown that there is affect ICP very minimally. So we no need to hesitate to PEEP increase from 5 to 6, 8, 10, 12, maybe up to 15 in animal adult, or can go up to 15 PEEP. After that, we don't know data, but up to 12 to 15, we can increase PEEP to maintain oxygenation. Oxygenation is the priority. Coming to the when you increase the PEEP, as you're mentioning, there is definitely, if the patient is not fluid preloaded well, or fluid not given, if the patient is dehydrated, if the patient is hypotensive already because of the bleed, then in that case, the moment you increase the PEEP, there is a drop in BP because of the increase in intrathoracic pressure reduces the return of the venous volume, so reduces the cardiac output, so that drops the BP. Whenever PEEP increase in PEEP reduce the venous return, that indirectly or directly causing the reduction in the BP, should be managed with the fluid rather than reducing PEEP. We have to give fluid, or when you can start vasopressor, but we can try to adequately fill the volume, try vasopressor, but not reduce the PEEP. So hypoxemia, and hypotension will kill more than the what you are talking about, ICP pressure transmitting to CPP or ICP. I'm sorry, P pressure transmitting to ICP.
Yeah, absolutely. There are many studies, like you mentioned, PEEP can be used up to 15 in patients with head injury or post neurosurgery, if it is required. And definitely PEEP inducing hypotension, we should be more worried of volume rather than the PEEP. Yeah. Okay. Most of these patients are like, they tend to be on a ventilator for a longer time. Is there high incidence of VAP noted in such patients?
Yes, definitely, Lakshmikant. When the patient is a longer duration of these patient, neurosurgical patient or head injury patient, they will require longer duration of ventilation. Definitely, the risk of infection increases. Definitely, so VAP will be more. And there is a if you look at the risk for VAP, most important risk factor is neurological patients, stroke patient, head injury patient. Head injury per se itself is the risk for VAP.
Yeah. And you mentioned about tracheostomy. How early is it better? Like suppose the Jesus is quite poor, it is expected to take time. How early is it better?
Timing of tracheostomy. Okay, if you talk about general timing of tracheostomy, there are a lot of controversies there. We talk about tracheostomy in case of head injury or traumatic brain injury. If the GCS is low, initially we know GCS is 3/15 or 5/15, and we know that this patient is requiring longer duration of ICU care and longer duration of ventilation, or there will be there is a risk of longer duration of airway compromise. Then we can go for early tracheostomy rather than waiting for later tracheostomy. Once you do tracheostomy, lot of things can be easily managed, like a sedation. Requirement sedation will be less, like paralyzing agent, requirement paralyzing agent will be less. The moment the sedation paralyzing agent will be less, the ventilating, the weaning of these patients will be very easy in that case. So it will be helpful to reduction of ventilator days, and also maybe ICU days. But timing of tracheostomy will not be associated with the mortality or infection per se, but definitely will be weaning and reduction of ICU ventilator days will be reduced significantly. We can go for tracheostomy if the GC is less than 8 as early as possible.
Yeah, as hyperventilation and hypoventilation both are quite riskier in such patients. Is it better to use ETCO2 in all the patients of head injury? Is there any such recommendation, or is it?
Yeah.
Is there any recommendation, or it's like if you have, it is better to use?
Yeah, see, ETCO2 is the key in ventilation is PSCO2. If we have a PSCO2 in the monitor, that will be a wonderful thing. Definitely ETCO2, especially once you intubate, rather than waiting for ABG. Sorry, I didn't mention that. If you have ETCO2 monitor, definitely we can do a great job. So we can avoid hypocapnia as much as possible. even from beginning itself. So ET severity is a very important monitor here that will be definitely helpful in these patients.
Yeah. The question here, Dr. Ashwini is asking, what is the best sedative to be used? And incidence of delirium as weaning is difficult and requiring more sedatives. So what is the sedative of choice? What is the sedative of choice of sedation in such patients, head injury patients?
Okay, choice of sedation, actually, we regularly, most of the time, use opioid as the analgesia, like a fentanyl, benzodiazepine as a midazolam as a sedatives, most of the time. But benzodiazepines definitely, with respect to delirium, if you speak, definitely increase the delirium. So we'll try to avoid, when already patient is restless, irritable, we'll try to avoid delirium, means we should avoid benzodiazepines. In that, dextromethorphan is the choice for the sedative of choice in this patient. But when the patient comes to ICU, he'll be, the most important parameter along with the airway, breathing, circulation is ICP management. In that case, keeping the calm is the more priority to reduce the ICP. So we are definitely prefer more of maybe benzodiazepines in this patient. When patient is okay with managing, then also we require sedatives, then you can go to dextromethorphan. So especially weaning, dextromethorphan is a good choice actually. But if you are using benzodiazepines, my message is to reduce as early as possible. If you have an option of dextromethorphan, you can go for dextromethorphan. That I can say. Best sedatives, best is very difficult to say, because dextromethorphan we can use only for 24 to 48 hours. There is a risk of bradycardia, hypertension also. But risk benefit ratio we can see in these patients.
Tailored, yeah. Maybe long-term benzodiazepines, it is better to avoid, like dextromethorphan, maybe the choice of initial choice of treatment. Propofol, benzodiazepines can as well be used. And
propofol is the best option initially. Maybe you can use propofol also, even if it reduces the ICP in this patient.
And this is in the same question, madam is asking, what is the incidence of delirium in patients with head injury? Is it high, low? Probably
delirium,
please go.
Any neurological patient delirium, the incident, I don't know the exact number as present. Actually, the delirium risk is more in this patient compared to other patient, because not only the pathology per se, patient is requiring longer duration of ICU care. Those are psychosocial factors also involved there, and also we are using, the drugs. The patient require a lot of sedatives. That is the one. So delirium incidence is more in these patients.
Yeah, maybe it is reasonable to assess the risk for delirium in all the cases, especially hypoactive delirium is relatively more common. There are multiple tools or the scales to assess delirium and assess and intervene whenever required. And prior to intubation, just would like to highlight this point. Patient has come with a borderline GCS maybe around 13. Like we always say, at 8 we should intubate 7 or 8. From 13, significant drop in GCS also is probably important, I think, to consider intubating such patients.
Yeah. Maybe sorry, I didn't mention that in the presentation. When the patient GCS drops by 2, as you are mentioning, is that definitely we have to look into the patient, look into the brain point of view. Maybe the patient definitely require intubation, ventilation, and also early CT scan brain. Any patient on the ventilator, we should know some signs. Actually, maybe you have to stop sedation and try to see sensorium, pupillary signs, and neurological ptosis and all neurological signs to be monitored regularly in this patient to identify what is happening in the brain.
Okay, like any worsening in GCS warrants early airway protection. Suppose the patient has come with a borderline GCS. Yeah. Dr. Swati wants to know, is there any role of prophylactic antibiotics in case of traumatic brain injury?
No, there is no role of prophylactic antibiotics in traumatic brain injury. Even though one study mentioning early ceftriaxone reduction in the ICU days and all, but as in India we are already having a major problem with the multi-drug resistant infection. definitely there is no role of prophylactic antibiotic in this patient, even though required longer duration ventilation. If there is a infection, suspected infection, then there is empirical role of antibiotics is there, but definitely not the prophylactic role of antibiotics. You should not use antibiotic prophylactically in this patient if there is no risk of infection or if there is no evidence of infection.
Yeah, I think now you have made it quite clear. The ventilator strategies, tidal volume, PEEP setting, FiO2, target PCO2, hemodynamic stability. Probably we'll just discuss slightly on the refractory hypoxia cases in patients of traumatic brain injury. A rare scenario, but we might come across. Is there any evidence for proning such patients if they go in for ARDS, head injury and proning?
Yeah, head injury and proning. As I mentioned earlier, oxygenation is the priority in this patient. If you are not able to maintain oxygenation, definitely we are not optimizing the brain parameter. That's the most important things. We can go if there is no contraindication, like if there is no spine injury, if there is no problem, we can go for prown. It doesn't mean it's not a contraindication. Prown ventilation should be considered early in this patient. If there is a refractory hypoxemia, in spite of high PEEP, saturation is dropping, definitely will go for prown and prolonged proning in this patient. So that is not a contraindication.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? Just for completion's sake, we haven't used ECMO, definitely. What is the recommendation of ECMO? Suppose the patient cannot be proned or is into refractory hypoxemia. Is there evidence for ECMO in such cases?
I didn't look into this actually. Maybe because already patient is having bleed inside the brain, and ECMO there is a lot of coagulation parameters to be monitored. The risk of bleeding is there. I don't know exactly. I have to look into this ECMO role in the TBI. I don't know.
As you told, heparin, because we'll have to use a lot of heparin. Anticoagulation becomes an issue in initial days of brain injury. So definitely the role of ECMO is less. But there's one article, Journal of Trauma in Acute Care, 2017. There's a heparin-free veno-venous ECMO has been tried. It's a small study, just for the sake of theories, like information and knowledge. I'm just telling you that in the sense for everybody. It's a small study where they've used heparin-free veno-venous acute ECMO. So they have done and they have had some benefit, it seems. But still, as I said, it's going to be very risky to use ECMO in such patients. I don't think there are any other questions. Yeah, it was quite informative talk, Dr. Raghunath. Thank you for enlightening us on the ventilator aspect of the head injury patients. And
Dr. Ravi sir want to ask. Dr. Ravi sir is there.
Ravi sir. Good afternoon, sir. Sir, mic mute.
Unmute, sir.
Sir, please unmute your mic. Hello, Ravi sir, please unmute your mic.
Dr. Ravi sir is the head of the Department of Anesthesiology, JJMC Davangere. Sir is attending this class since beginning, actually, since day one. Sir is there.
Sir,
hello, sir.
I'm very sorry, sir. I was late because I was held up in a meeting in a DC. I'm sorry. Yes, please, can you, if you don't mind, can you enlighten 2 minutes of the ventilation head injury? 2 minutes for me, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
okay,
please,
definitely.
Let's summarize. Yeah.
Love to know about it because I was held up there. I came urgently and just switched up my PC here.
Okay,
can you
sir.
please, sir?
Yeah, definitely, sir. Just I will
summarize the points and
please,
summarize.
please,
Just
sir.
in 2 minutes, I'll summarize.
Thank you
sir,
so much.
What we have discussed is the most important thing is there is a cerebral brain volume, CSF and blood. Three important factors are there. If you increase one volume, increase the other volume, so ICP will increase. So the most important parameter here is we maintain airway breathing circulation, avoiding hypoxia and hypotension. Those are the two important things, and preventing hypercarbia. These are the three parameters very important we have mentioned, sir, because hypoxia will kill the patient, hypertension will kill the patient. Hypoxia, hypertension avoiding is the key in these patients, sir. That's what we have discussed actually. Intubation, if the GPC is less, if the airway protection required, intubate early. And
Yes,
patient always keep in a propped up 30-degree propped up position. Adequate sedation analgesia is the key to reduce the ICP. Carbon dioxide, the increase in carbon dioxide increases the ICP causing because of vasodilatation. So maintaining normocarbia is the key in managing patient, in ventilating these patients. So avoiding hypoxemia, maintaining carbon dioxide normocarbia is the key in these patients. There is evidence for that. So prophylactic hyperventilation, there is no role. Try to avoid prophylactic hyperventilation as much as possible. If there is a PEEP requirement is there, we can use PEEP up to 12 or sometimes even 15 PEEP can be increased. That will not increases the ICP significantly. It will cause very minimal increase in ICP. That is not significant. So we can use PEEP in this patient. So weaning will be a difficult one. So we have to use lesser sedation if possible. When there is lesser neuromuscular blockade, if that is not really required, optimizing ventilatory settings is the, and optimizing cardiovascular function is the key. And early physiotherapy is the answer in this patient, and early tracheostomy will helpful in the weaning these patients, sir. That's the message we have given, sir.
So much, sir. So much. Beautiful, just beautiful. Thank you very much. I was late. I was thinking I lost something. I thought so. I came early.
Thank you, Dr. Raghunath. Thank you, Ravi sir. And probably as just a thought, the questions being asked are quite few. In fact, especially next class, we should ask questions to the participants rather than expecting questions from them. At least for our students from Gopalgoda. Okay, thank you, Raghunath, and thank you for preparing it in a very short notice. Today's topic was supposed to be done by someone else. Thank you, and I thank all the participants for being present and listening to us patiently. Thank you.
Thank you, Raghu. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Taking time for me. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.